Okay, I'm doing chores, but I want to put my hair up and let's talk about cookies. Now that Christmas is over, let's talk about cookies. Okay. I used to be a pretty terrible baker because I didn't really know. They say it's a science, and it is a science, but it's more that you just have to have an understanding of why it's done a certain way, and then once you have that understanding, then it just makes you want to do it because you realize the difference in your cookies. And really, this goes for most baking in general. But okay, first thing is you want to add all of your wet ingredients. So you're going to have a bowl with all your wet ingredients, and then you're going to have a bowl with all your dry ingredients. Okay, so we're going to start with our wet ingredients. It's usually going to start with sugar and butter. So the reason that you want to put these together first and not be like, so what I used to do is I'd be like sugar, butter, vanilla, egg. Now I'll mix it all together. It's still all of the dry ingredients and wet ingredients separately. It's fine. It's fucking not fine. Here's why. So when you add your butter and your sugar together, the butter like coats the sugar. And it kind of like encapsulates it and it protects it. So then if you were to just add your sugar and then your egg is just going to melt your sugar, and then your whole thing is going to have kind of a runny consistency to it. So that is why you don't want to add it all together at one time. You want to add it all together separately. And then, stop, look and listen. So your sugar, whatever your sugar is, and your butter, add that together and you're going to cream it. You're going to cream it until it gets nice and fluffy, because that's going to give you a nice and fluffy consistency. And so like a couple minutes. And then you're going to add your egg, your vanilla, whatever else, because now your sugar has been protected. And so you add all that together. So now you're going to work on your dry ingredients. And the reason you're going to do that is because things like baking powder and baking soda are like when you get a bite of that, right? So you want to make sure it's really dispersed into it, because if you pour it straight into your wet ingredients, sometimes you'll get like a pocket of that. That'll happen. And it won't, and then things don't rise properly. So your baking powder, baking soda, that makes it rise, makes it puff up. If that is like in a clump over here stuck to the butter, then you're going to have uneven rising. That's going to happen too. Okay. So plus like salt, you don't want to get a mouthful of salt either. So you put that in there. Here's the thing that I don't always do, but I wish that I did, because it would make things way better. Sift your stuff. So as there's sifters, they're like, and it comes out. Or you can just take a colander, like a fine mesh strainer, and you can put all your dry ingredients in there and just tap it, tap, till it all comes out the bottom. So then you're not going to get any clumps. So I have clumps because I also keep my baking powder and baking soda forever. I will get like clumps in it. So the other day I made some snickerdoodle blondies, and Chris was like, what did you do to those? Like, what are you talking about? He's like, they were good, but there was just like, you would get a bite, and I was like, oh, baking powder, because I didn't do that. So you'll get little crumbs, you'll get like bigger chunks of it that get stuck together, and that eliminates all of that, and it just like makes it nice and fluffy. Okay, so now you're going to add them together. Here's the thing I don't do that they advise you do. Add it like in thirds. Add your dry stuff in thirds. I don't always do that, but I will. At least I'll add it in there, and then I'll give it like a mix, and then I'll walk away and do something else for like 30 seconds, and then I come back. So I give it time to incorporate it, but it does mix them better if you do it in thirds. And then you're going to mix it all together, and you don't want to over mix your stuff. You never want it like pancakes and biscuits and stuff like that. This is even more relevant there, but when you over mix it, it gets tough, and its consistency changes. You're going to change the gluten, everything like that. Just like as you're kneading flour, it changes the gluten. And if you go too far or not enough, the gluten won't be developed enough. Another thing that's really, most cookies, if you put them in the refrigerator, so make the cookie dough and then put it in the refrigerator, it gets that butter to like set back up, but it also lets the glutens puff up and develop a little bit. And it's a different type of cookie. There are these cookies that are like 3-day cookies that you like you got to let them sit in the refrigerator for like 3 days and they're supposed to be like the best cookies ever. Well, it pays to chill your shit. Another thing that most people, that like a big mistake people make with cookies is they overbake them. Like, because they continue to set up after you pull them out of the oven, like just a little bit. So there's this, oh, here's the thing I always do is I watched this movie back in the day. I don't remember what it was. I want to say Mandy Moore was in it. Mandy was in it. Probably Mandy Moore. And she was like, it was like a rom-com, and she was a baker, and she was like baking at his house, and then she goes to leave because they like get in a fight or something, but then all of a sudden she's like, do you smell that? And he's like, yeah. And she's like, the cookies are done. And he's like, how do you know? The alarm hasn't gone off. And she's like, I can smell them. I know they're done. Smell them. That's how I can tell if my bread is done. All of a sudden I just get like this. And that's that whole thing of like using your senses. So much of everything that we do is like, I just got to do it. I'm doing it. And you're like on autopilot, but really that's the being present, you know, really looking at the things, being present with it, because your brain takes in so much more information. I mean, have you ever thought about like walking on a trail or something and it's all uneven? Like, how is it possible that we can just like walk ahead of us and not fall and trip? I mean, I do a little, but not like seriously do some falling and tripping. Why is it like our brain is scanning, our eyes and brain are working together to scan the environment way ahead of us and tell us where we need to place our feet, that we can just walk with looking forward? That's bananas. That is crazy. But our brain does that with everything. It takes in so much information. And that's like why making mistakes is so important, because every time you make a mistake, your brain's like, oh, correct that. And it does it without us even thinking about it. There are corrections that we make that are huge, like aha moments. But a lot of the correction happens just like it does as we're walking down a trail, and it's telling us to step here, step there based off of the rock pattern and stuff. Same thing with like learning to draw or sew, or, you know, like that muscle memory. We like, oh, it's muscle memory, but also it basically that is our brain correcting these tiny little mistakes as we go. And it's the same thing with baking. You use your senses. Like, you know, you're like when you mix things and you're like, oh, that's enough mixing. Like, I know because I've trained myself to do it, because by not even thinking about training myself, just doing it over and over again, and my brain being like, oh yeah, that's where it is, and me listening to that and being present enough to listen to it. Same thing with the smell. Like, I can smell when things are done. They are done. Like, I know. Whereas before I probably smelled that, but I wasn't paying attention, or I smelt it and I didn't attribute it. But once I started really being present, baking game changes. And so I used to tell people, I said, I can't bake. I'm a great cook, but I can't bake. Well, I'm a really good cook because I just like throw it in there and I feel it with my soul. You know those memes where they're like, add garlic until your soul talks to your ancestors and they know it's good. Like, literally, that's how I cook. Like, I cook until I'm like, oh yeah, that feels good. And sidetrack. That's what I do. When you're cooking, it's the same thing. You cooking, you don't have as much like science to it. It's not the science. It's just there's specific orders that you do things in. And with cooking, you use those same principles, but you can also be like, well, garlic, it says a tablespoon. Here's 3 tablespoons. Oh, but I mean, there's a reason why you don't go up to 6 tablespoons, and there's a science to it all too. You know, even sunlight hurts if you get too much. So there's always that cap. But just being present in your cooking changes it so much. And I used to say to my kids jokingly, you know what the secret, they'd be like, oh, this is so good. I say, you know what the secret ingredients is? And they're like, what? Love. But that's true. Like, when you are being thoughtful about what you're making and you're like loving it and loving making it, and you've got a purpose driven behind it, it tastes better because you're more present in it. So be present. Cook with love.